Public hearing of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on the Australian Commission for Law Enforcement Integrity for its examination of the annual report of the Integrity Commissioner 2021-22. I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to the elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. These are public proceedings being video streamed live via the Parliament's website, and a Hansard transcript is being made. I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It's unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence. Witnesses also have a right to request to be heard in camera. The Senate has resolved that an officer of a department of the Commonwealth or of a state shall not be asked to give opinions on matter of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officer to superior officers or to a minister. This resolution does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. If a witness objects to answering a question, they should state the ground upon which the objection is made, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer, having regard to the ground which is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request that the answer be given in camera. Commonwealth officers appearing today are also reminded of the Senate order specifying the process by which a claim of public interest immunity should be raised. A copy of the order is available from the Secretariat. If there are no objections from the committee members, I propose the committee agree Wednesday the 8th of March as the date for responses to any questions that are taken on notice. No objections? No. I now welcome officials from the Australian Commission for Law Enforcement Integrity. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committee has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, will you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today? Do you want to start, Commissioner? Thank you.
Petra Gartman, Deputy Integrity Commissioner.
Brendan Huff, Executive Director, Operations Northern.
Sonia Parze, Executive Director, Prevention and Engagement.
Peter Ratcliffe, Executive Director, Operations Southern.
David Swan, Chief Operating Officer.
Jason Maguire, Chief Financial Officer.
Great. Can I thank you all for your attendance today? Lovely to see you all again. I now invite you, Commissioner, if you would like to make a short opening statement, and at the conclusion of any remarks I will invite members of the committee to ask questions.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a short...
sorry, Commissioner, just before you start, if the bells ring, certainly I think most of us will have to go. If green for the House of Reps, usually I can get paired out, but couldn't get paired out today.
We will just sit and wait until you're able to come back.
If that's okay. Thank you.
We'll be completely in your hands, Chair.
Thank you. Just a word of warning, so thanks.
I have a very short opening statement, Chair, just to start us off, and also just to give some context to the annual report that you're inquiring into today. The 2021-22 year was a year of further maturing and development for ACLI. Throughout the year, we embedded the work that we'd undertaken in 2021 to bring the 5 new agencies into our jurisdiction, and ended the year with our first prosecution before the courts of corruption offences involving an ATO officer in Operation Barker. Operation Barker is a significant bribery investigation undertaken by ACLI with the ATO, with the allegation that a bribe in the amount of approximately $150,000 was paid to a law enforcement staff member. During the year, we conducted our first biennial stakeholder survey of our jurisdictional agencies to understand stakeholder perceptions of our work and to assess our own performance. The results were pleasing, with an overall satisfaction rate of 89%. More importantly, though, the survey provided us with useful feedback on areas for us to continue to improve, including in relation to our timeliness. While timeliness has been an area we've made improvements in over the past year, the survey has pointed to further areas in which we can improve, including the triage of our assessment work. A major focus for the 2021-22 year was recruitment. We ended the financial year with a head count of 103 staff. This has continued to grow and is now 112 staff. At the end of the 2021-22 financial year, we had 2 staff members in Melbourne. This has now grown to 8, and in December we opened our Melbourne office. You will see from the executive that I have here with me today the growth in staffing of ACLE. When I started as the Integrity Commissioner nearly 3 years ago, I had 2 senior executives to support the work of ACLE. I now have a Deputy Commissioner, which was recommended by this committee in the review of our annual report last year, and 4 branch heads. They are each supported by teams that are growing in their maturity of processes and systems. As I mentioned in previous annual reports, we have been focusing on maturing ACLE in preparation for a broad jurisdiction anti-corruption commission to be established. This financial year, we took the next step in this process, working with AGD on the establishment of the National Anti-Corruption Commission. This has included dedicating one of our senior lawyers to work with AGD on the drafting of the legislation, leading a project with AGD to build a new ICT platform for the NAC, noting that ACLE currently has shared services arrangement with AGD for our ICT, undertaking property projects for new leases for the NAC, building an intake and assessment process that will be capable of dealing with the number of matters that might come to the NAC, engaging through an organisational design process and continued recruitment. We have 3 clear priorities for the remainder of our time as ACLE. They are, number 1, to complete the legislative requirements for ACLE, number 2, to finish ACLE well, number 3, to work with AGD on the establishment of the NAC. This means that there are some innovations we might like to pursue, but we will put aside while we concentrate on these 3 priorities. While this might be difficult in the short term, as ACLE is full of innovative thinkers, we understand that time will come for more of that innovative thinking once the NAC has commenced its maturity journey. It has been my practice at these hearings before this committee to provide up-to-date data on the active investigations we are conducting. We currently have 23 active investigations that relate to 35 corruption issues. We have 1 brief of evidence with the CDPP to assess. We have 4 matters before the courts, which involve 6 defendants. And we have 14 investigations that are complete, which involve 24 corruption issues that are currently moving through our report writing process. In relation to investigation reports, in 2021-22, I provided 12 reports to the Attorney-General, which related to 13 corruption issues. So far this financial year, I have provided 11 reports to the Attorney-General, which relate to 14 corruption issues. It might be useful for me to provide you with some information in relation to our data as you consider our annual report. Our base unit of measurement is corruption issues. Each corruption issue relates to an allegation of corruption or of corrupt conduct. An investigation, a brief of evidence, a prosecution or a report can relate to 1 or more corruption issues. Where this is the case, we have indicated the unit of measure within our annual report. For example, number of prosecutions, number of defendants, or number of reports. Finally, I would like to thank the committee for your continuing oversight of my role as Integrity Commissioner and of ACLE. As I've indicated in the annual report, given the breadth of powers available to the Integrity Commissioner and to ACLE, this oversight is an important aspect of the Law Enforcement Integrity Framework. And I thank you very much for your engagement in our work over the 2021-22 year.
Thank you, Commissioner. Can I thank you for the work that you and your staff have undertaken? Sounds like a pretty hectic workload. I noticed that you've managed to successfully reduce the backlog of cases that you previously faced. Can you explain to us, besides obviously the increasing staffing, which I presumed helped in that area, what other issues helped, or were what other important measures you were able to use to help to achieve this?
Thank you, Chair. We've introduced a number of initiatives over the past 3 years, at the time that I've been Integrity Commissioner, to work at each stage of an investigation's life cycle to ensure that we have capacity to do the work that is on hand, rather than to have a growing backlog of matters. Some of the things that we have put in place have included a 90-day review of our investigations, an operations board which oversights our investigative work, and we've particularly put a range of resources into the writing of our investigation reports. As you can readily appreciate, the doing the investigation part takes lots of resources and is usually quite exciting, but the next part is incredibly important, which is writing the investigation report. I had a significant backlog of investigation reports when I commenced as Integrity Commissioner. We are working our way have been working our way through those, and you can see that in terms of the numbers of reports that we have given to the Attorney General as required by the Leak Act, and then have gone through to publishing, which is a second process within the Act. We are very close to completing that backlog now, and we will continue to invest resources in relation to that to make sure that we get through those investigation reports. I'll just turn to Mr Ratcliffe. Is there anything else in relation to what we've been doing in that investigation space to ensure that we don't create a backlog of work?
Thanks, Commissioner. Chair, yeah, the only thing I would add is just to expand a little on the focus of closing off on some of the old cases. As of last month, we were down to 44 current cases, and only 7 of those are currently over 2 years. Given the remarks by the Commissioner about the length of time it takes for the report writing process and sometimes for the court process to go, we feel that's a significant step forward. Over the next couple of months as well, we'll be looking to reduce that even further in preparation for the NAC. And I wasn't sure whether Mr Hoff might have something more to say on that.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Pete. We've developed quite a robust case categorisation model, which is going to help us get to that 1 July period. And it's basically a way of ensuring that we're resourcing all our investigations appropriately to ensure that we can close down as many as possible before we get to 1 July, and also an objective criteria to determine which of those matters we could foreseeably transfer across into the NAC and continue investigation under that new entity.
Yeah. What might stop you transferring anything?
So under the NAC legislation in the transitionals, there's provisions for investigations to move into the NAC in one of 2 ways, either as a Leak Act investigation, so it operates as if the Leak Act continues, or the Commissioner can decide, the National Anti-Corruption Commissioner can decide to bring those investigations in under the NAC legislation. And what we are doing, and what Mr Hoff was just referring to, is we're making sure that we are reviewing our cases in terms of, or our investigations in terms of the criteria under the NAC legislation, to make sure that when the Commissioner starts, that the matters that should be continued as Leak Act matters are clearly identified, the matters that should continue or that could come under the NAC Act, but also the matters that actually we've done all the investigation on and there's no further investigation that needs to be done, that we close those off, or that those investigations are unlikely to fall within the NAC tests, that we make sure that they are finished before the NAC commences. Okay,
so with the 23 active investigations you've got now, they will all be resolved one way or another?
Some of them will be resolved, some of them will move into
Not necessarily, I didn't mean necessarily by 1 July, but
yes,
in one way or another, they won't
right.
just be left.
Yeah.
There won't be any just left in mid-air.
No, that's right.
No.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
and and I've got powers under the Leak Act both to discontinue matters when further investigation isn't warranted. So,
yeah.
For example, if we've conducted investigation and there's no evidence that is clearly supporting the allegation, there's more investigation that we could possibly take. But given that we've taken numerous investigation steps and nothing is supporting the allegation, we might at that stage decide to discontinue and move on to other investigations.
Sure, yeah, no, understand that. I ask you this question fairly often, but can you comment on any patterns or trends regarding corrupt behaviour or corruption vulnerabilities over the last 5 years?
I can particularly talk in relation to the last 3 years that I've been the Integrity Commissioner, and I'm really pleased to let the committee know that again this year I have published my corruptions vulnerability brief. So that was published for the first time last financial year, on the basis that the corruption vulnerabilities that we are seeing, in my mind, have implication across the APS rather than just to the law enforcement agencies, and I want that to be a learning tool for other agencies as well. So again, this year we've published that vulnerability brief. Again, I see a continuum of behaviour that falls within the definition of corrupt conduct. From at one end of the spectrum, browsing for information on Commonwealth systems, particularly looking up family and friends and or notable people on systems, but not doing anything further with that information. So that's at one very low end of the spectrum, right through to the unauthorised use of that information, particularly in order to for commercial advantage or for advantage of others. Bribery, as I mentioned, Operation Barker, which is a significant bribery case that we have at the moment before the courts. And abuse of office, whether it be in relation to the use of information, the making of decision-making powers to benefit self or others.
Just two more questions from me, then I'll hand over to other committee members. In contrast to other Commonwealth agencies which have discretion as to whether to refer evidence to the AFP or the CDPP, the Integrity Commissioner must assemble evidence and provide it to the AFP and the CDPP where ACLI obtains evidence of an offence against the Commonwealth. Are you aware if this condition will apply under the NAC?
So the condition will not apply under the NAC.
Right.
So it's not a mandatory provision. The National Anti-Corruption Commissioner will be able to refer briefs to the Commonwealth DPP, which is our practice as well. But I think it's a good thing that that mandatory requirement is not carried through from the Leak Act, and I've spoken before this committee about my concerns about that being a mandatory requirement in the Leak Act, because it means that there have been occasions on which we've had evidence of offending, but it's not been particularly serious offending, but it meets the definition in the Leak Act, and I've had to then refer it. That then wastes our time to put a brief together, but it also wastes the CDPP's time in having to assess it. So a discretion there, which is what occurs for all other investigative agencies, is a good thing.
Great. And can you just elaborate for us on your priorities for the 2022-23 year as outlined in your annual report review?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned in my opening, I've been really clear with staff, and I'm sure that everyone at this table can recite this ad nauseum, that we have three priorities. The first one is we need to do what's legislatively required of ACLI. So you will hear things from Mr Ratcliffe and Mr Hoff in relation to the work that they're doing on investigations. That is legislatively required of us, and we will continue to do that. We will also continue to assess the matters that come to us and make decisions about investigations. The second priority is that we will end ACLI well. We're in a very fortunate position that we know that ACLI is coming to an end. Often agencies don't know that they're going to go through a MOG until it happens. We have prior warning that it's about to happen. And so what I mean by ending ACLI well is we're going to take some opportunities over the next 5 months to celebrate what ACLI has done, and I've reached out to the former Integrity Commissioners and to agency heads in my jurisdiction in order for them to be able to share with my staff some of the things that they have seen in terms of ACLI's growth over the past 16 years. Our next priority, or our third priority, is to work with AGD on the establishment of the NAC. AGD is the portfolio department. The establishment of the NAC is their responsibility, but we are working very closely with them as ACLI will will go through a machinery of government process. All of our resources, all of our staffing, all of our property will move into and become the NACs. So there are things that we are doing in terms of our own process, particularly around that intake and assessment and triaging, which is not as simple as simply upscaling to the NAC. It will be quite a different level, I suspect, of matters that will come in. And so we're really concentrating on things like that, building the new ICT, bringing on new properties for the NAC, for the various places where the NAC will have offices, and the recruitment.
Great, thank you. Senator Brockman, I'll go to you first.
Thank you, Ms Hinchcliffe. So in terms of the transition to the NAC, so is it yet clear, is it effectively ACLI will just expand to fill, or will ACLI as it currently stands be a discrete part of the NAC and the current team will be filled out to meet the new demands? How you envisage the transition will actually occur?
So most importantly is that the NAC will be a new agency. So it's not an expanded ACLI, it's not ACLI 2.0, it is a new entity in itself, but all of ACLI's staff will be mogged into the NAC and as I said, our property and our resources. There will be a new executive in relation to the Commissioner and Deputy Commissioners and the CEO, which AGD has been running that process in relation to those statutory officers. And we're engaging at the moment in a piece of organisational design work, which is looking at what does the structure of the NAC look like, how do, because ACLI staff will move into the NAC, how do their positions connect over to the positions in the NAC, but it will be a different entity from the NAC. Ms Gartman, my deputy, is particularly running a lot of our NAC work. Is there anything else that you would say on that process?
Thank you, Commissioner. I would just add that ACLI as it exists now will not be a branch of the National Anti-Corruption Commission. It will be dispersed through there.
So that is why what Mr Hoff was talking about earlier in terms of needing to finalise those cases has to happen, because ACLI does cease to exist and then the new commissioner needs to decide whether matters still on foot are taken up. Is that, I've got that correct?
Yes.
That is correct. The new Commissioner will decide two things. One, whether the Commissioner will continue with matters, and then secondly, whether those matters will be conducted under the Leak Act provisions or under the new National Anti-Corruption Commission Act.
There's no chance in that process that something drops out because it's not within scope?
I think that will be a matter for the new Commissioner, and it will depend on how the legislation is interpreted.
Right.
So it's more likely, Senator, that there might be some matters that will continue to be investigated as if the Leak Act were still effectively in operation.
But effectively that is going to be at the discretion of the Commissioner?
Correct.
All matters are transferred though under the transitionals. All outstanding matters are transferred across.
Correct.
What the NAC does with them, you can't say.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's up to the Commissioner whether they're picked up or not?
No, well,
Sorry, just a little bit of order. Sorry, Senator Brockman, have you finished, or have you got
I'm
more
happy to hand the
questions?
call over.
Okay, okay, clarify, and then I'm going to Ms Murphy,
So
and then I'm going to
in your opening
Senator Shewridge.
statement, you said that you were finalising some ongoing investigations that may not fall into the net or jurisdiction, I suppose.
So-
How would you describe those?
So particularly finalising matters, and I may have put that in a difficult way, but finalising matters, as I've said, where we've conducted investigation but we're not seeing anything that particularly supports the allegation, making sure that we finalise off those quickly so that they're not matters that then the NAC Commissioner needs to deal with.
So it's not a jurisdictional...
It's not, that's right. So there might be some matters that will go in and the Commissioner will deal with them under the Leak Act, where we'll go through a process where we can identify that for the Commissioner as well, and then the Commissioner can make decisions.
Okay. Ms Murphy.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. I'm sorry I haven't been able to engage in this committee very much until now, but I'm pleased to be here. I just wanted to pick up something you said when you were talking about your corruption vulnerabilities report and the, I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but the probably unsurprising conclusion that those vulnerabilities go across the public service and not just law enforcement organisations. I'm just wondering what, if any, work is being done with those other public service departments about those vulnerabilities in, what colour is that, red? In preparation.
Can I suggest Mr Zapier chair while I'm on? Mr Zapier, can you chair while I'm going to vote?
I'll do my best.
Thanks. I'm sure it'll be wonderful. Thank you. Sorry. Or you can just hold for 7 minutes.
We're in your hands, whatever you want to do.
We'll continue.
It's up to you.
So, Peter, Peter, you had the floor?
I was sort of halfway through quite a verbose question.
Keep going with that at least.
Yeah.
I mean, you know where I'm going with this question, obviously, before I get to the end. Is any work being done, and what is it with the departments in preparation for them coming under the jurisdiction of the Anti-Corruption Commission?
Sure. So I've taken the view over my time as Integrity Commissioner that if there is information available to me that has a broader remit than just the agencies in my jurisdiction, to share that as broadly as I can. So as I indicated, we, for the first time 2 years ago, we published our corruption vulnerability brief, particularly because it seemed to me that these are not necessarily things that just relate to my jurisdiction. So we've done that again this year, and not merely published it. Both years I published it and also sent it out to secretaries of all departments, and encouraged them to share it with their portfolio agencies as well, to start thinking about their corruption risks. Last year, we also published a framework that we worked on called an Integrity Maturity Model Framework. And again, it has, we worked on that particularly in relation to our jurisdictional agencies, but it seemed to us that it actually has much broader remit. And so we have pushed that out to all Commonwealth secretaries again and encouraged them to send that through to their portfolio agencies as well. That maturity model framework looks to the indicators of what you would see in a mature or in various levels of an integrity framework within an agency, so including what sort of policies and processes you would see across various indicators. These are initial pieces of work, which are work that we could have done as ACLI, which would have been useful to our jurisdictional agencies, but had broader remit across to other government departments, and we were very keen to share that with them. There's another piece of work that's going on at the moment and being led by the Attorney General's Department in relation to stakeholder engagement, in relation to the implementation of the National Anti-Corruption Commission. And I'll hand over to Ms Gartman and Ms Pace in a moment because they're working on that. But one thing I will say in relation to how the National Anti-Corruption Commission will engage across the Commonwealth, and again, I won't bind the National Anti-Corruption Commission. It will be a matter for those commissioners. I've been in a very lucky position that I've had 10 agencies to deal with, and as ACLI, we've had quite good personal relationships at various levels within those organisations. And a lot of what we have done in that engagement space has been face-to-face engagement, has been one-on-one engagement with agencies. The National Anti-Corruption Commission will be in a significantly different position to what ACLI's been in. And so it is important that at this stage, instead of us continuing to do what we've always done, that we take this moment to do some significantly different thinking about how you engage with potentially 1,300 agencies. So I'll just turn to Ms Gartman and Ms Pace to see if they've got anything to
I'm eager to hear from both of you, but just before you do speak, that all seems eminently sensible to me, and I guess is partly why I asked the question I asked, because providing that useful information and frameworks to secretaries is one thing, but some sort of systematic approach to making sure it then gets adopted or acted on is probably another thing. And there is that window of opportunity, and I'm absolutely conscious it's an enormous task and there's a lot happening with that transition, but as you said, particularly because the Anti-Corruption Commission will be a different sort of organisation and have different reasons for distance.
And I think
that seems more important now.
I've leaned in as much as I possibly can, noting what my jurisdiction is. What I can do now is we've got this next few months before the commission is established, where we can, in effect, in some of that space, take a moment to do some significant different thinking about how you do that corruption prevention education, stakeholder engagement piece, so that at least when the National Anti-Corruption Commission commences, some of that thinking has been done, ready to start to implement. But I'm also conscious that on day one of the National Anti-Corruption Commission, it will be a one-day-old organisation. So it needs to then mature. We'll do a whole lot of thinking in this next little while. Some of that will work, some of it might not work. Some of it might resonate with the commissioners, or they might have completely different ideas of how to do that. And we need to give them the space to be able to work through and mature as an organisation.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And the Attorney General's Department will have an important role. So sorry to stop you from answering, but go ahead.
Thank you, Senator. As you just raised, the Attorney General's Department does have an important role as the policy owner in this space, and without being very careful not to take credit for anyone else's work, there is quite a bit of...
that happens all the time in this building. Why should you not do it?
I think it's dangerous to answer that. So there is a body of work going on at the moment to prepare the public sector. We, and particularly my colleague, Ms Passy, we're heavily engaged in this work, but it's being run by Attorney General's Department with the support of the APSC and also PM&C.
Okay. Do you want to add anything, Ms Passy?
What I'd like to add is that I really see it at the moment as a couple of pieces of work, and so the Attorney General's Department is really doing the introduction. It's just alerting people to what's ahead, what's coming, and trying to get to as many people as possible. And they have a schedule for that, and we're going to collaborate with them. But in terms of what I'm doing with my team is we're preparing for the 3rd of July onwards, the 3rd being a Monday. And we're looking at what we've learnt as ACLI and how we engage with providers, or how we engage, with Commonwealth entities and agencies, and taking from that how we will operate from the 3rd. So we know that some vulnerabilities, as we said, are common, so we can start with those, but we also know that everyone will come to us with a different level of maturity, and that's where the integrity maturity framework assists us, because it has 8 principles that entities can self-assess and understand where they fit in the integrity journey. And so we might structure our work according to those 8 principles, so they could maybe identify 2 that they want to work in, that they feel that they're perhaps weaker in, and we will have materials ready for them. So we can't do things the same as we have done as ACLI, because we will have so many more entities, but that's where we're looking at what are those principles that we've used for prevention and education, and how can we take those forward.
Thank you. And Commissioner, I slightly scoffed when you said it will be a one-day-old organisation, not because I was trying to be restricted, but I was thinking about all the people who will expect it to be able to act like a 3-year-old organisation on day one, and all of those pressures. That was what my reaction was.
No, completely understandable. And it's taken a little while for us to get our heads around that as well, because we're an agency and we'll move into the National Anti-Corruption Commission. But that's that's an important issue for us to understand as well, because, as I said, it sounds a bit glib. It's not, the NAC is not ACLE 2.0, and we need to be really clear that this is something different. That it will build on the learnings of ACLE, and there's a whole lot of things that I am very hopeful that it will learn from ACLE, including, as the Chair mentioned, the backlog of cases we've had in the past. I hope for the NAC that it will learn from that and will not have the same thing happen. And I'll do my very best to convey some of that to the commissioners when they come on board. But also keen to give it its space to become what it's going to become.
Thank you. Very good timing, Chair. I've finished my questions. If I duck out, it's because I have to give a speech on paid parental leave, so apologies for that. I'm finished.
Sorry, thank you.
Back in the chair.
Mr Zappi, excellent job, Chair.
Can I thank Mr Zappi? I want to put it on the public record. What a wonderful job you did in my absence. Thank you. Mr O'Brien, have you got any questions?
Oh, look, I've only just got one brief one, and look, I may even be asking this to the wrong people, which maybe it's when the NAC's finally established. But so the rolling in or the conclusion of ACLE and then the creation of the NAC, obviously there will still be specific law enforcement related powers and investigations and the way those investigations occur. So will there be a division or a group within ACLE that specifically deal with law enforcement? And I'm thinking around integrity testing and all those sort of things particularly.
So in the organisation design piece, we thought, and there's various ways that you can possibly put this together. We thought about, do we have separate investigation teams that look at different agencies? Do we have separate investigation teams that look at different corruption types? Where we've landed at the moment is that we will have a similar setup to what we have with ACLE at the moment, that we'll have investigation teams that are based on geography and dealing with matters from a certain region, rather than having it split across law enforcement or non-law enforcement or fraud, and abuse of office, or however else you might choose to split that. We've done that for a couple of reasons. The first is that we don't have a good sense of the data of what might come from the rest of the APS yet. So we're pretty clear on the data from law enforcement and what that looks like, but we're not clear on what else, other than we think that in that first while there'll be a lot of matters that will be referred to us that will need to be assessed. So knowing exactly how to break up those teams to make sure that we had the right people doing the right things, we thought, let's stick with geography, which is how we're currently broken up, until we get that sort of data and see if there's a better way of breaking up the investigation teams. The second part of that is to enable the corruption investigators that we have at the moment, who are corruption specialists, to be able to share their knowledge across the teams. While there are some specific issues that occur with law enforcement, a lot of what we see is not specific to law enforcement, and so we want to be able to use that speciality in corruption investigation to quickly grow that capability in the other investigators that we bring on in terms ready for the NAC. Mr Ratcliffe, was there anything else in relation to that piece that you'd like to share?
If I may, Mr O'Brien, we might just add to the point about the recruitment. So ACLE in its early years was very much, we tended to recruit people from a law enforcement background, therefore we had a lot of expertise, and they've contributed a great deal to our being able to investigate other law enforcement acts of corruption. We've made a fairly conscious decision over the last year or two to broaden that pool. So we now have people in our investigative and operational teams from a range of agencies, which is never going to cover the whole of the 1,300, but we're hopeful that it gives a bit more of, I guess, a background for those investigative teams to be able to go into any agency who we need to work with a little bit more, perhaps, knowledge of the broader public service. Mm-hmm. So I think that's an important step that we've tried to make.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mr Zapier.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for your evidence thus far. I do have a couple of questions, and the first one goes to the 10 departments that you've got oversight over. Which of those don't have an internal investigation unit? Or do you, if it's easier, which ones do?
Well, we have, I think all of them have an integrity area that we are dealing with. The way that we have split those agencies up is that Mr Radcliffe has responsibility, stakeholder engagement responsibility for some of them, and Mr Hoff has responsibility for some of them. So I'll just turn to them quickly and see if they can think of anyone that doesn't have an internal investigation or an internal integrity. It's usually called an integrity unit.
Yeah, that could do their own investigations rather than refer them to you.
Yeah. Of the 5 that I have, they all do to a degree. I guess something like the ACIC will have a more advanced one than perhaps some of our more recent jurisdictional agencies who are focused more, I guess, on the traditionally more regulatory side.
Yep.
But we definitely are always able to engage with the right people in those teams on my agencies.
Yeah.
Mr. Hoff.
My question is going to this. Why are they not doing their own investigations rather than referring them to yourselves and using your resources, given that many of the ones you've reported on appear to be not at senior management? Therefore, I would assume it's not a case that you've got to do it because you don't trust the hierarchy of the department.
It's a good question, Mr Zapier, and there's a constant tension between whether we take on an investigation or refer it back to an agency to do it. So the majority of the matters we do refer back to agencies to conduct themselves, and we do so usually through our assessment board process, and then either Mr Radcliffe or Mr Hoff makes that decision. If a matter is being recommended that ACLI investigate, it comes to me and I make that decision. And so there's a process that we go through at the moment through our assessment board where the allegation is considered, and then a recommendation is made to either Mr Hoff or Mr Radcliffe about sending it back to the agency to investigate, or whether ACLI will investigate it. I think we've matured in that over the last few years. I completely agree with you, there are matters, and one in particular that we've referred to in our annual report that were it to come to the assessments board today, it wouldn't be investigated by ACLI, it would be investigated by the agency. And part of that weighing up is also there are times in which agencies usually do code of conduct investigations when we refer them back. There's times when that is not only entirely appropriate, but that is a better course than a corruption investigation undertaken by ACLI. And we make those decisions thinking about the capacity of the agency to do the investigation, the capacity of ACLI to do the investigation, the seriousness of the allegation, and whether indeed whether it's dealt with better by the organisation. There's a list of factors in section 27 of the Leak Act that we refer to. But as I say, I acknowledge, as I said, particularly there's one matter that we've reported on that were to go to our assessment board today, it wouldn't be an ACLI investigation.
All right. And my other question, in your report it says that 91 matters raised a corruption issue. Of those, 46 were investigated. That leaves 45 that were not. Do you know if the different agencies, as a result of ACLI not investigating them, did their own investigation subsequent to that? Or do they, once you say you won't investigate, say, well, okay, that's the end of it?
So we actually track that quite well, and it's been one of the improvements we've made over the last few years. That sits in Mr Ratcliffe's area, and I'll just get him to explain to you how we go about that.
Mr Zapier, the short answer is yes. We track it on a 3-monthly basis. So we will have regular meetings with the integrity areas of each of the agencies who we have investigations out with. There are some obligations in the Lake Act in terms of them reporting back to us. So the majority of the cases that we send out under Section 66 of the Lake Act, the agency in question has to provide a final investigation report, which the Commissioner then has to sign off on as showing that it's been an investigation which we assess under the Lake Act is up to standard. We can ask for more frequent reporting, but we've tried to move away from forcing those agencies to write to us, and rather than that, going to a personal engagement on a quarterly or a 6 monthly basis.
No worries, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Senator White.
I just want to ask about the staffing difficulties that you've had in the past, and the difficulties in recruiting, new people with the appropriate skill sets. Have you been able to share or provided any advice to the Attorney General's Department on the resources that is going to be needed for the NAC and the issues that you might have had? I'm sorry if somebody's asked that already, but
No, not at all, Senator. So, you're right. The Attorney General's Department undertook the NPP process, which resulted in ACLI receiving additional funds this financial year in relation to the establishment of the NAC, and part of that is in relation to recruitment for the NAC. We haven't received funds in order for the NAC to be fully staffed on the 1st of July, and I think that's entirely appropriate. We've received funding for an additional 23 ASL, which, given that the budget was in October and the time that it takes to recruit, we think amounts to about 45 to 50 additional staff that we can bring on this year, ready for the NAC. The NAC we expect will then receive additional funding and will grow further in the first 2 years. Some of the issues that we have seen previously has been in relation to recruiting particularly investigators and intel analysts, because it's a relatively small market and we were a very small agency, and so opportunities for promotion, opportunities for diverse work was not necessarily there. We've done a range of work within the organisation, including bringing lower level staff on to provide career progression points, which helps with some of that. People are excited to potentially work on the NAC, so we are getting good fields that are coming in relation to our recruitment. One thing that we're seeing, which in conversations with other integrity agencies seems to be across the Commonwealth at the moment, is the tightness of the market. So we are bringing people on and they're working with us for a while, and then they're getting promotions from our organisation out to other organisations, or they're getting poached by other organisations that can pay better. All of that. There's a round robin of staff that's happening. That's something that we are keeping an eye on, but it means that we are continually recruiting, not just to meet the additional ASL that we have, but also because people are being seen as being it's being seen as being a positive to have worked with ACLI, and as the agency head, that's a great thing. But as the agency head, that's also a hard thing, because I'd like to keep them for a bit longer to make that work.
Yeah, so just on that, what are things then that are driving people to move on? Is it rates of pay as against where they could go within the public service? Is that part of it, as to where you are on kind of the ladder of, or the range, where ACLI is in the range of different rates?
Particularly in relation to, we're seeing people getting promotions very quickly, so that then creates a pay issue. We also are aware that some of the other law enforcement agencies, because we're a public service agency and not a traditional law enforcement agency, there's a lot of add-ons in some of their pay rates that we don't compete with. I'll just check with our crew, Mr. Swan. Is there anything else that you're seeing through our exit interviews?
It's primarily been around the opportunity to work elsewhere in those other agencies that provide those benefits. We sit about midpoint in the APS in terms of our salary, so we're not at either extreme. But yeah, certainly it's been positive feedback that working at ACLI has provided that opportunity to move on, and most have indicated they would come back and work for us, so that's a positive.
So, sorry, can I just ask, you do exit surveys?
Yeah, we do. We've implemented exit surveys over the last 2 years so that we can understand why people are moving.
And do you think having 3 different offices, having offices in different states is going to makes a difference in kind of the pool of people that are prepared to apply?
I think that certainly helping us now that we have our Melbourne office that opened late last year, and we'll be opening office in Brisbane and Perth. So in terms of looking at broadening our market, not just through the eastern offices, so that will help as well.
So you're opening offices in Brisbane and Perth?
Yes, Senator. So as part of the funding that we received in this financial year, in this budget, which is the NAC establishment funding, includes money for new leases, and those leases are in Brisbane and Perth. They're not. They're for
the NAC.
They're for the NAC.
Okay.
That's exactly right. Just like the additional funding that we got on recruitment is for the
as long as they're for the NAC, that's good.
Yeah, that's right.
So not opening and closing them. This is
Absolutely not.
No.
This is
absolutely not. That's right.
This is in preparation.
That's exactly right.
They'll come online when the NAC is operational.
Yeah, thank you. That's it.
Okay, just before I go to Senator Shoebridge, when are they due to open? Do you have
1 July.
timelines?
We're currently working in sourcing appropriate sites and working to engage services to start the fit out. So
hopefully by 1 July? Are we hopeful or not?
Canberra is our priority at the moment to be as close to 1 July as possible.
Okay, great.
I suspect, Senator, given the timing and where we're at, that they will come on. They'll come on this calendar year, but probably won't be ready for 1 July.
Right.
And we will work on arrangements in terms of, just as we did in Melbourne, where we started to bring on staff but had them working off-site, and then brought them into the office. We'll do the same in Brisbane and Perth.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Senator Shoebridge, you've been very patient. Thank you. Your turn.
Thanks, Chair. Going to the annual report, I assume it's the average delay of investigations that you refer off to other agencies. It says partner agencies. Is that all agencies?
They're the agencies within our jurisdiction.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. The average delay is 852 days, like 2.25, almost 2.5 years. What is the longest delay that you've been tracking?
Mr. Ratcliffe, do you have that number?
Senator, I don't have that number. What I can tell you since the annual report is that that number has dropped to 697 days, which is still not, it's still not ideal.
What would be useful for my purposes would be to see that agency by agency. And if you could provide that detail. And also, I tend to find average is not a very useful figure. If we could get the median, would be a far more accurate reporting figure and an identification of what the longest outstanding is. But
And of course that changes at a point in time, but we will take that on notice and get that.
Well, if we could get it for the end of 2021, 22, so we compare it to that, and then whatever the current figures are would be great. But that's an extraordinary delay in these agencies. Is this when you get your section, is this the reference for when you get your Section 66 report?
That's
is that
right.
When that ends?
That's right. So that's when that timing ends. I would say a couple of things about that. We have worked, I think that what we're seeing through these figures as well is that agencies, similarly to the fact that ACLI had a backlog, agencies have had a backlog of matters that they've been investigating, and we are now working much closer with them in relation to the matters that they have on hand.
I just don't see any of that in the annual report, any of that kind of analysis, and nor can I may have missed it, nor do I see any analysis of what's actually found in these reports, let alone the number of Section 66 reports you receive. Given that's a big chunk of the work, it's like a black box as far as I see from the annual report. I don't know what happened.
I'll take that on advisement, Senator. I note that what I'm seeing in relation to those matters, I think, is that some agencies have had a backlog, and that we've put in place a process to work with them more closely in relation to those and to track those.
Well, I suppose, I'm trying to find how many Section 66 reports were received from different agencies and whether they found corruption or didn't find corruption, and whether you were satisfied with the action that was taken. That seems to me an important part of your work, given more than half of the identified corruption issues are dealt with that way. Can you give us that?
So, Senator, under the Act, agency heads have to provide, as I said, a report under Section 66. Then I can make recommendations or comments on that.
Yep.
On my recollection, there's a discussion in the Act in terms of whether or not I've made any comments in relation to those matters in that financial year. I'm happy just to have a quick look for that for you.
Surely that doesn't prevent the basic statistical reporting, like we've referred off this many, we got this many Section 66 reports, they found corruption in this number. I mean, it's more than half the work in terms of identified corruption. We don't know what happens with it.
Senator, I'm happy to take all of that and consider that in terms of our performance measures going forward and in terms of the NAC.
Well, can you give us the data from 2021 of the number of Section 66 reports and the numbers that identified corruption? And
So
can you give us the data,
so the number
if you
of
have
Section
for this
66
financial
reports,
year, of the Section 60 reports and the Section 66 reports?
yes, so the
and
number of
that
Section
identified?
66 reports on page 66
Yep.
of the annual report. So the total number that we reviewed this financial year has been 89, and the number that we reviewed within our time frame was 87. That's
Yep.
in table 15. And then just above that, it indicates that I made one recommendation,
Yep.
which was accepted by the partner agency out of those 89 that were reviewed. So that was the number that we received.
But what was the outcome from it? How many of them identified corruption? How many of did it have a corruption
Senator, we'll take
fighting?
that on notice for you.
I was also having a look at the sort of headline data on page 5 and trying to marry it up with the statistical data on page, I think it's 130 from memory. 131.
Yes.
So 131 is the statistical reports for 2021, 22, is that right?
So the statistical reporting that goes from 130 onwards reflects the reporting requirements that are in the Leak Act and the leak regulations. It is slightly different to the statistical reporting that's within our APS because we're counting slightly different things. So there is differences between what's in Appendix 3 and within our performance statement. And we did a bit of work this year to see how we could, whether we could marry that up further. We have done a little bit more in terms on page 132, trying to have some dashboards there, but the numbers don't marry it up completely because they're reporting on slightly different things.
Well, they say the same thing, though, don't they, in terms of what you're reporting on? 95 matters were assessed as raising a corruption issue. You say that on 131, but on page 5 you say 91. On page 131 you say there were 67 investigations, 38 by ACLI and 29 referred back to agencies for investigation. You say that on 131, but on page 5 you say there were 43 investigations by
So the
ACLI.
difference between the 43 and the 41 relates to the matters on page 132 and 131 relates to just matters that went through an assessment process. It doesn't include matters that were reconsidered. So there was a matter that was reconsidered from an agency investigation and became a ACLI investigation, and there were also 4 matters that were reconsidered coming out of a current ACLI investigation that raised new matters. So that's the 5 difference between the 38 and the 43. So that's what I'm saying about.
5 of the 43 were reconsidered, were they?
Yes, that's right. They were matters that were reconsidered from either an ACLI investigation or an agency investigation.
So did the agency refer it back to you?
So we reconsidered the matter and took on the investigation.
Okay, so where it says 38 by ACLI on 131,
Yep, yes.
is that, for some reason, that's a reference only to primary determinations.
Yeah, that's right.
basically.
So the assessments that were, this is the assessments that were done in 2001, 2002, and this is talking about the numbers on page 5, and in the performance measure are talking about all of the considerations. And I understand that the differences there, which relate to the very particular way that the requirements are set out in the leak regulations, which is why we have this difference in the Appendix 3 statistical reporting.
And it says that of the 95 matters that were assessed as raising a corruption issue, there were only 67 investigations. So what happened to the other 28 matters where there was a corruption issue raised?
So under the Act, I can decide to take no further action at that assessment stage, because either it's being dealt with by an agency through their own investigation, or it doesn't warrant further investigation.
So what's a corruption issue that doesn't warrant
So a
further
corruption
investigation?
issue is
That doesn't warrant-
defined under the Act.
No, I know the definition. Give me an example of a corruption issue that doesn't require investigation.
So it might be, for example, straight browsing would meet the definition of corruption issues, but an agency might come to us and say, we're already conducting a code, it's a corruption issue, and I will say it doesn't require further investigation because it's being dealt with through a code of conduct at the agency.
Senator Shoebridge, we have run out of time. Are you happy to put other questions on notice, because we need to move to a private meeting?
Well, I was hoping to just ask a few questions on some of the substantive investigations.
I can give you till 10:02, but that's the absolute latest. We're going to go till 1:45.
All right.
But you can put questions on notice.
All right, well, I'll take that opportunity you've given me, Chair. Can I just ask about the... you've provided the summary of the reports under section 54.
Sure.
I think it's on 20 to pages 20 following. There are a number of cases where there's been findings of corruption, findings of concern, but there's no evidence about what, if any, accountability was happened. There's about half of them. There are, when there's a finding of corruption, there's criminal investigations commenced, but for example, in Operation Venari, there's deeply inappropriate conduct by an AFP officer, including the providing of improperly accessing and disclosing AFP information, but there's no evidence that any actual accountability was taken.
Under the Act, I need to provide a summary of these matters within my report, and each of these reports since then have now been the investigation reports have now been published. So I can take you to the investigation report on Venari, which is now on our website. And in relation to that matter, a brief of evidence the former Integrity Commissioner referred a brief of evidence to the CDPP. In relation to the two officers, and a code of conduct investigation was conducted by AFP Professional Standards. In relation to the criminal proceedings, one of the officers pled guilty to disclosing information contrary to Section 70 of the Crimes Act, and was convicted without sentence on the basis of entering a good behaviour bond for 12 months. The CDPP did not recommend charges in relation to the other person, and both of them were considered, their employment was considered for suitability by PRS.
And are they
They've both resigned.
They've both resigned. In terms of operations Embla, Ajax and Chandra, involving Embla and Chandra, both where there's conduct of locally engaged employees at either a High Commission or an embassy, I think both High Commissions, obviously there are difficulties because there's a foreign jurisdiction potentially.
That's right. That's right. So in relation to Operation Embla, again, this is published and is on my website. DFAT commenced disciplinary proceedings against the two officers for potential breach of the Code of Conduct, and as a result of those proceedings, both officers had their employment terminated.
But there was no criminal action taken against them despite the criminal conduct?
That's right.
And is there a process where, and I assume it's the same in Chandra?
with Chandra. In relation to Chandra, I might just have a look.
I'm comfortable
at
if that comes on notice,
Yeah.
as well as
And again, it's on
Yeah.
on public record
Yeah.
because it's
If there's-
the report is published.
Yeah. I mean, I would have thought that they probably were criminal offences under their local law, and I wondered if there was a gap in our efforts there to pass that on to local authorities, or if it's just a political decision. It's embarrassing.
Senator, I don't know that there's necessarily a gap there. Investigations were undertaken by ACLI, and proceedings, code of conduct proceedings were undertaken by DFAT. You're absolutely right. Where there is people in other countries, that creates a whole range of difficulties, including in relation to mutual assistance and extradition and all of those things. I'm comfortable in relation to the information that we've put out in the investigations reports on these matters.
Right, my last question is in relation to the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission. They seem to be having regular legal difficulties, regularly having their efforts at using coercive powers set aside in the courts, including under constitutional challenges, and losing the great majority of those cases. Is this something you've been tracking?
And you'll see in terms of our annual report, we refer to legislative decisions that impact on us. And so that's a requirement under annual reports that we need to report on, and we've reported a number of matters there. Of course, I'm aware of X7 and Lee, the first cases that really started to look at the use of coercive hearing powers and the impacts
there's a whole bunch
of use immunity. Thanks, Senator. And there is that impacts the way we think about our hearing power, appropriately impacts on it, because of course under the Leak Act, if I summon somebody to a hearing, then they must attend. It's a coercive power, and their right to not answer questions in relation to self-incrimination is taken away from them.
I think probably
then it's appropriate that
Sorry, Commissioner,
in
you
those
probably misunderstood
circumstances.
the import of my question. Obviously, I'm grateful that you've looked into it in terms of your own powers.
I am going to have to finish you up here. We have to have a private meeting that has to conclude.
Yep. My bigger concern
very
is
quickly.
what oversight you've had of the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission. If it's repeatedly using coercive powers that are being routinely knocked off in the courts, there's a problem there in how they're going about using their powers. Have you investigated that?
So I haven't investigated that, and it hasn't been referred to me in relation to whether or not it's a corruption issue. Of course, there might be administrative issues that are going on in terms of decisions that are being made for hearings. I don't know. That wouldn't necessarily be a corruption issue. But if you are concerned, Senator, that you have seen a corruption issue there, I'm very happy for you to refer that through to me to have a look at.
All right.
Noting that, of course, not all administrative issues are corruption issues, but if you are concerned that there's a corruption issue, I'm happy for you to send that through.
Well, I think in terms of referring any fresh work to you in February would be a challenging outcome for you. Yep.
We must remain open for business until we're closed for business.
Thank you. That concludes today's hearings. Thank you to everyone who appeared and to Hansard and Broadcasting for their assistance. The committee has agreed that responses to any questions on notice should be provided by Wednesday the 8th of March 2023. Thank you, Commissioner and staff. The committee stands adjourned. But not this committee. Stay put, because we'll have a quick private meeting when the room's cleared. Thank you.